She would wound us deeply with cruel hands. Then those same hands became gentle and comforting to heal us. Eventually, we began to crave her touch and then, ultimately, to love it.
Shrakuer, Rifleman.
The apartment was small, made for a privileged officer of the Way of the Means security force. The Fist of the Emperor provided small units for some officers to live in off-post, mostly for those politically connected or who might be a rising star. It was 4 rooms. A toilet, a kitchen/dining room, a lounge/living room, and a single bedroom. With the living room being nearly 15 feet across, the space was plentiful and luxurious. The lights were off, but the lights of the city bled through the curtains over the windows on the outside wall. The light spilled through the kitchen/dining room and into the front room. It bathed the bathroom, where the toilet was deployed instead of the fresher, but the little bedroom was lit only by small telltale LED pinpricks that made the room dim instead of dark. Curled up in the bed were 2 Fulton, a large female with a scarred face, notches missing from her ears, and a bad scar down the side of her head and neck that travelled across her shoulder and down one arm. The scar was an upraised keloid that sliced through the fur of the female's luxurious pelt. She was well muscled, with a data link on her left temple that had 2 softly glowing green pips. In her arms was a male, large for his sex, but still small next to the female. His pelt was soft and luxurious, well groomed, with good colouring. The hands that held onto the female's embracing arm had well cared for nails. His whiskers were long and firm, and he had long eyelashes. Both had barcodes seared into their flesh on their forearms and the backs of their necks, just like every other DRA, Fulton Imperial citizen. On top of the small table in the bedroom were 2 folded sets of clothing. One was a military uniform, heavy ballistic cloth with an urban pattern on it. The other was a plain set of workers' coveralls and underclothing. A set of boots and a pair of shoes were next to the bed. Both breathed slow and steadily, cuddled up to one another. The sun rose, slowly, painting the eastern sky in reds and purples. The male opened his eyes first. He looked around, then closed his eyes and snuggled backwards, squeezing the female's arm affectionately. He went back to sleep. Nearly an hour later the female opened her eyes. She looked around and gave the equivalent of a frown. She tapped the male, waking him up. They both sat up, looking around. "Where do you think we are now?" the male asked, leaning against the female. "Not sure," the female said. She got to her feet, moving to the clothing and looking through it, then looking in the drawers of the 3-drawer chest. "No weapons," she said.
Odd.
"Tools?" the male asked. "No," the female said. She held up a thick plastic card with a 2.5D hologram image on it. "Multi-pass." "Mine." She held up another. "Yours." The male got up, moving over and slowly dressing. "New clothes," he said. He sniffed the shirt repeatedly. "Never worn." The female dressed, handing the multipass to the male when he was dressed. "I feel naked," she complained. The male nodded, knowing that it referred to the fact she didn't have a weapon. Once dressed, the female waved the male to stand in the corner, his back against the side wall, as she moved up to the door. She opened it slowly, using her foot to push it open, then waited. After a few seconds she peeked out into the front room/lounge. "Clear," she said softly. She looked at the male. "Stay here a moment." The male nodded, waiting as she disappeared. After a few minutes, during which he heard another door open, she came back. "It's clear. Looks like a nice little apartment in an apartment building. I didn't check outside the only door. Windows show a city," she said. The male nodded, then followed her into the front room. He moved over to the window, moving the curtain just enough to see. "We're in Varmtenvin," he said, letting the curtain go back to normally. Not letting go, but moving his finger slowly. A lesson hard learned. "The capital? How did we—" "Never mind. I know how," she said. She looked around, spotting the comlink built into the wall. "If they don't know we're here yet, they will as soon as we use an elevator or pass by a checkpoint," she stated. The male just nodded. She looked at him. "I know, Hrekkle," she said softly. She moved over to him and hugged him, running her claws through the fur on the back of his neck. "But we have to call in, or they'll send Way of the Path to come collect us. I just don't want to be separated from you, the male said softly, barely audible. He hugged her tightly. "You're a part of me now." "I know," she said. She waited until he let go and moved over to the comlink. "I'll call it in." Hrekkle looked doubtful, but stayed silent. Part of him wished he was still in hell. At least they had been together. Senior Agent Yu, decorated combat veteran of the Way of the Means, sat stiffly in the plastic-backed chair. Her hands were on the table, displaying the chrome-plated cuffs around her wrist. A chain went from the cuff connection chain to a chain around her waist, running through a chrome-plated ring, then continued on to connect to the chain that was between her feet. She was still dressed in the strange military uniform. The door opened and 2 agents from the Way of the Path came in. Both sat down across from her and busied themselves with the file folders, printed on plas sheets, that they had brought in. Lu just watched. Finally, the female on the left cleared her throat, looking at Lu. "You have been gone for 5 years. Deserting your post." "Explain," the female said without bothering to introduce herself, give her rank or office, or any other normal introductory phrases etiquette demanded. "I was abducted by a powerful terror," Lu stated. The male looked down, scanning the file. "The terrors are extinct. Someone should tell her," Lu said. "She was very much alive, as were her loyal soldiers." The female sighed. "You expect us to believe that a terror reached out and abducted you from a secure military facility, on a restricted planet, in a classified system, without leaving any trace?" Lu shrugged. "It is what happened. Describe the terror," the male ordered. Lu gave the description. Terror. Female. Pale skin. Black hair held in a long braid. Plump. Older. Approximately middle-aged. Short. Barely 5 foot tall. Cold. Gunmetal grey eyes. She called herself D, Lu said. Short for the detainee. She claimed to be the Lady Lord of Hell, the matron of the damned, and the mistress of lost souls. What did she want with you? An average Way of the Means special operative? Military secrets? Information on the Way of the Means? Data on the Dire Fulton Empire? The male asked. Lu shook her head. If she wanted any of that, she didn't tell us. What did she want? The female asked. Lu sat quietly for a moment. I do not know. Who else was there? The female agent asked. Lu described and named the 5 others, including Hrekkle. You worked with members of enemy nations? The male accused. You had to be there, Lu stated. She dropped us off, with no instructions beyond survive, and then left us to our own devices. In the Clown Face Nebula, a restricted area of fallen Confederacy space, where even the Forerunners and Precursors do not go, the male said. There's a good reason for that, Lu said softly, looking at the table. What is that? The female asked. The terrors are there, she said. Living terrors? The male scoffed. If you can call that living, Lu said. She looked up. They're still fighting. Where they are all dead, their creations keep fighting. It's over 30,000 years later, and they're still fighting. That's all they know, is unending war. What happened? The female asked. Lu described moving place to place, of going to sleep one place and waking up another, then of the encounter with the other version of the detainee. She had to describe the encounter 4 times. Then what? The male asked. Lu looked down. Then it was time for our lessons, she said softly. She'd finished teaching us the most important one, the lesson she wanted us to bring back. What was that? The male said, leaning forward. Lu stared at him. Children shouldn't play with dead things. Freckle sat comfortably in the office, a drink in his hand. There were a half-dozen senior scientists in the room, and Freckle knew that dozens more were watching. After that terrible time in that horrible place, she just started teaching you things? A disembodied voice asked. Yes, senior researcher, Freckle said. What exactly? Another voice asked. Particle physics, material engineering, many things, Freckle said. He sipped at his drink, then looked up. It is good to taste the drinks of my home again. The gathered scientists all nodded. Do you feel as if she taught you all she knew? Another disembodied voice asked. Freckle shook his head. No. There was so much it took me so long to understand. I had to understand the second lesson, just like it had taken me so long to determine the first lesson she taught. The scientists all nodded, and there was sounds of agreeing contemplation from the other seats. May I have another? Freckle asked. Of course, a scientist said. He got up, got a can from the freezer, and brought it over. The can of Bobco Super Sparkle Cherry Blast was cold, and it made the trademarked shick sound when Freckle opened it. What was the second lesson? Someone asked after Freckle took a long drink. A moment, a disembodied voice said. I must disconnect. Can you forward me the recording of this interview? Of course, one of the scientists present said. Good. My guild is assaulting the Molten War Core tonight, and I don't want to be late, the speaker said. Gotta bring the dots. Good luck, another voice said. There was chuckles as the unseen watcher disconnected. The second lesson was that I had to learn much to learn that I knew almost nothing, Freckle said. The scientists all nodded. While we learned that in training, the matron of the damned and the mother of dark science needed me to know just how ignorant I was, and how my ignorance put me in danger, Freckle said. He looked around. May I ask a personal request? He said softly. Of course. What do you desire? The highest-ranked scientist asked. Lu sat on the bunk in the cell, staring at the floor. Patience. Wait for your opportunity. The longer they think you are passive, the more they will relax, believing that because you aren't doing anything you cannot do anything. The voice in her ear was rough, low-pitched and full of authority. She shivered slightly at the memory of the being whose voice it was, a hard-faced terror male, whose body was made of heavy bone, thick muscle, and cable-like tendons, whose determination and focus had frightened her at first. Small electronic sounds made her look up. The guard outside of her little cell had a small datapad in her hand, and her other hand was moving quickly across the screen, eliciting more beeps and dings. On the back of the datapad was the red in the middle of the black segmented iris with the hexagonal border. The terror is here, and they do not even realize it, she thought to herself. The datapad chimed, and the guard tapped it a few times. She lifted it up and listened to it, then nodded. Time for transfer, prisoner, the guard said. Lu just nodded. A drive to the spaceport and a suborbital flight, then another drive to a large building that was heavily guarded. She was escorted inside, deep into the building, and was startled to realize she had been taken to a barracks section. The door opened up, and she was led inside. You may get comfortable, the guard told her. She just nodded. The guard left, and she explored it quickly. A living room connected to a dining room. a kitchen closed off by doors, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom with a fresher, a sink, a mirror, and a toilet, luxurious in space, design, and materials. She sat on the couch and was surprised at how comfortable it was. Less than 10 minutes later the door opened. She smiled when she saw who had entered. Hrekle rushed over to her, hugging her tightly. They both combed the other's fur on the back of their neck for a long moment, then released. "How?" Lou asked. "I have agreed to cooperate with my superiors, to share the knowledge they have shared with me," Hrekle said. Lou nodded. "You were not treated so well?" Hrekle asked. She shook her head. "No. I was kept in a cell and interrogated repeatedly. No violence or negative stimulation, just constant questioning." "They did not believe you?" Hrekle asked. Lou shook her head, taking his hand and leading him to the comfortable couch. She sat down, then pulled out the smaller seat from under the edge of the couch. Hrekle sat down, undoing his coveralls and pulling off his shirt so she could groom the fur on his back. "No. My answers seemed to anger them, as if I was lying or withholding information," she said. "How did they believe you?" Hrekle sighed as her claws went to work, combing his fur, easing the tension in his muscles, scratching itches he didn't know he had. "Science is either repeatable and provable, or it isn't," he stated. "I demonstrated the soundness of several theories she taught me, and they listened. You arranged for me to be brought here. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of wonder." "Yes," Hrekle said. He touched her shin where it was next to him. "I need you." She leaned forward, resting her head over the top of his and closing her eyes. "And I need you." After a moment she sighed and sat up, going back to grooming the smaller male. "You are not worried about what you have to tell them?" Hrekle shrugged. "They will believe it, or they will not." Hrekle stared at the gathered scientists, the holographic dots of witnesses not present, and inhaled. "What I am about to tell you, you may not like. You may not believe it. You may even think that the information doesn't matter," he said. "This is what I was sent back to tell you by the Lady Lord of Hell, the mother of dark science." He could feel everyone tense. He stared at each of them. "The statement starts with a question," he said. He looked at each of them again. They all leaned forward. Even the holographic dots seemed to move closer to Hrekle. "Are you a virgin?" That confused murmurs. Hrekle just shrugged. "It's the second part that is the most important," Hrekle said. Hrekle stared at the highest-ranking member present. Taskapak whispered in the agent's ear. Unvarak turned away from where he was staring at the snow, looking at his lifelong friend before he spoke. "I know where the path of the traveler begins and how to activate it.